My name is Karen Jensen, and I am a YA librarian, and I am also a blogger. I blog at teenlibrariantoolbox.com, which is part of School Library Journal. And I am coming to you today from Texas, where it is wet and cold and dreary. So this is exciting. I am thrilled to be here with Kate Moore, the author of the Radium Girls, and she is joining us from London, one of my favorite places. And before we begin, I am just going to go over a couple of housekeeping items for you. At the end of this event, we are going to pick 3 lucky participants who are going to win a YA prize pack. So thank you all for registering and attending, and information about that will be at the end of the webinar for you. Also, we do encourage you to submit questions via the Google Doc link that's been shared with you. We're going to do it this way for the safety and security of everyone. So if you have any questions, submit it that way. And at the end of this, we will get to them. And let's go ahead and begin. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Kate, our very wonderful guest for today. Kate Moore is the award-winning author, New York Times and USA Today bestselling author of The Radium Girls. She's a British writer based in London, and she has published numerous Sunday Times bestsellers, writing across various genres, including history, biography, true crime, and humor. She began her career in publishing after graduating from the University of Warwick and worked as an in-house editor at various publishing houses for over a decade. Most recently as an editorial director of Penguin Random House. And now she works full-time as an author, ghostwriter, and book editor. She has written more than 15 books, and her work has been translated into more than 12 different languages, which is really impressive. So hello, Kate. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello, Karen. Thank you so much for hosting and moderating. I really appreciate it.
I'm excited.
Me too.
So before we get started, I just want to take a moment to tell you, I'm actually, in addition to working with teens, I'm in several book clubs, and I'm in 2 adult book clubs, and we've all, in all of those, read this book. I love this book. It's really a great book, and I thank you very much for writing it. And I do have a question for you. How did you come across the story, and what made you decide to write it?
Okay. I truly think this was a kind of serendipitous journey of discovery, basically me connecting with this story. Obviously, I am British. I'm based in London. This is a piece of American history, and little known American history at that. So many readers I meet are always surprised. They're like, we've never heard of the story, and we live in America. We are Americans. How on earth did you discover it? And it was sort of this, as I say, serendipitous thing. I wasn't looking for a new book to write. I wasn't looking for the story of the Radium Girls. I didn't know about it. I was literally sat here on my couch where I'm sitting right now in my flat in London, the spring of 2015, and I had just made my directorial debut in theatre. Had loved it, and I was like, I really want to direct another play. So I Googled great plays for women, because as a female director, I like staging plays with great story and so on. So I wanted was These Shining Lives by Melanie Marnich, and it's about the Ottawa dial painters. Completely fell in love with the story. This story of strong women fighting for their rights, absolutely universal. Melanie wrote it in such a beautifully poetic, heartfelt, emotional way. I fell in love with the script. So immediately wanted to put the play on. That in itself was a journey of discovery, because we applied for the rights and we got a no. And I basically would not take no for an answer, because even at that early stage, I was so passionate about this story that I was like, I am not taking no for an answer. So I phoned the agent and basically begged to be allowed to put the play on, because I felt passionate about telling it on stage. And then once we got that yes, he changed his mind, luckily, and we got a yes to put the play on. And so I started researching, because I knew it was a play based on true story. I knew that Catherine Donahue and Pearl Payne and Charlotte Purcell were real people, wanted to do justice to their story. But everything I read, I couldn't find the book that I wanted to read, which was a book about the women, telling you all the personal details of their lives, because that's what I wanted to, you know, be able to tell my actors these are who the people are. You know, when we're improvising Catherine and Tom's wedding, this was the reality of what actually happened. And there wasn't a book that did that. There were academic books that were, you know, had great authentic detail, but they were about industrial health reform, or they were about the science in this story, and they weren't about the women. And I was just, you know, my mind was just blown by the fact there wasn't a book about them, because for me, the women are the center of this story. You know, they're the people the history happened to.
Sure, for sure.
And yet they were the ones that, you know, had not been commemorated. They've not been remembered. Their achievements had been to a degree, but the actual people, the humans, the individuals had totally been forgotten. And how the book came about was I was just so shocked, and I thought it was a travesty that there wasn't a book that celebrated them and told their stories. And I was, you know, I'd fallen in love with them, and so I wanted to go on that journey of discovery. I wanted to find out what Tom and Catherine's wedding was like in reality. And so that's how the book came to be. I was like, if no one else has written this book, then why don't I? Because these women deserve a book. And even though I'm British, and even though I'm not a scientist or a lawyer or a historian, I did English at college, I was like, I need to tell this story. And so that need and that passion that had put the play on was then all invested in the book as well. And that it always came from this driving force of loving the women and wanting them to be remembered and celebrated.
That is awesome. I did wonder about you in London and the book.
Yeah, it's a bit strange.
I actually just finished reading a YA novel pretty recently. And it's interesting because it's about a girl in a theater class, and she wants to put on the play that you just referenced about the Shining Girls.
Yeah.
I didn't know that there was a play. So that was interesting.
Yeah, there are actually two plays as well. There's one called Radium Girls by D.W. Gregory, which is about the New Jersey women. And actually that one gets put on more by high schools because it's got a bigger cast. So if any high school librarians are tuning into this chat and you want some suggestions for a high school play, Radium Girls by D.W. Gregory has a massive cast. So a lot of schools put that on.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'm a librarian, and I have the most important question of all. Go about researching this book. I want to know about the research process.
Well, I mean, it was the hugest project I've ever taken on. And I think I was lucky. I think I was quite naive, actually, when I started, when I pitched my book, certainly. I, you know, agreed a deadline with the publisher that once I started researching, I was like, this is absolutely impossible. And it was a wonderful journey of discovery. As I say, I came with this passion for the small details. And I could just remember being so excited sitting in the library in Ottawa, Illinois, going through the microfilm of the newspapers, the local newspapers, and finding articles about Catherine and Tom's wedding, you know, the pink and green color scheme, the 22 guests, and just being so excited to uncover all those details. So for me, the research obviously had to be in America. I had to come and, you know, I spent a month in America traveling around, going to all the different sites, and spending, you know, days in the Library of Congress in Washington, going through all the Raymond Berry papers, who is the New Jersey Girls lawyer. He donated his papers, and they are a gold mine because they've got all the transcripts of the New Jersey trial. So obviously, you know, first person accounts from the women describing in their own words what happened to them, which was just incredible. His files also had some of the x-rays of some of the women, a tranche of newspaper clippings. So just a phenomenal resource. And I would say the research, it sort of took several prongs. So number one, I wanted to physically go to the places, because anyone who's read the book knows that it's written as narrative nonfiction. It's incredibly descriptive. It's written almost like a novel, but everything in it is factual and based on, you know, it's a nonfiction history book, but it's written in hopefully a very readable, novelistic way. So I wanted to go to those places so that I knew what it was like to be there, so that I could walk the journey from Catherine Donahew's house to the dial painting studio and know that it took me 7 minutes, details like that. There's a line in the book about Catherine living a stone's throw from Division Street, and the way the women's court case split the town, how apt it was that she lived so close to Division Street. And obviously I suppose I could have looked on Google Maps, but I wouldn't have known it unless I'd gone there and walked that path. So I wanted to go there in person. I was looking for the women's own voices. So I was really hoping to find letters, diaries, the court transcripts, the newspaper interviews. That was a key part. And obviously that involved a lot of archival research, hours in dusty libraries, pouring through things like that. And then, of course, interviewing family members. That for me was critical, because with the women at the center of the book, I wanted to know what these people were like as people, not, in some ways, not even what just they had left behind, because sometimes we don't know what is important and what makes us us, but our families know. And it was wonderful to interview sons and daughters, the grandchildren, sisters, of these women, and discover, what they like to cook, what games they like to play, who was really devout, who was cheeky and a kind of, smart talker, and really to get that personality coming to life. So it was just wonderful. It was the best research trip. And then, of course, I had to go home and go through all the material that I had found.
So you originally wrote it as this version for adults.
Yeah.
And of course, it's, the story of these girls, and they're painting the faces, the wash faces with the radium. Story of what happened to them afterwards, and how it affected their health, and how they fought for workers' rights, women's rights, and, and the process of how a lot of people in positions of power lied and manipulated and kind of, cheated their life and their well-being and their happiness. So you take that really kind of dark story, and you turned it into a young reader's edition. I have to say, you love this cover with the
They did an amazing job. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great cover. So what is the process for you as an author to go through and take a book you originally wrote for adults and turn it into something that you're written now for a younger reader? And what was different?
It was different. It was hard. I would say that actually it really helped me know the original version was out there, because what was hard when I was editing the original version was that I knew this was my only chance to sort of tell their story in full. So it was really hard cutting things. Whereas when I had to trim down for young readers, I had two things sort of in the back of my head. One, it doesn't matter if I cut this bit, because it's in the adult book and it there as a record. So it's okay if I don't have it in this book, because it's out there in the world. It's okay. And the second thing to think about, of course, is I want young people to enjoy this story, to engage in it. And so you have to make those cuts, you have to make those edits, and it's sort of like the more important thing is that a reader will pick it up and enjoy it and not think it's too long, there's too many characters, so on and so forth. So it was like the greater good required the edits that I had to make. So as hard as it always is to make edits and to make cuts, those things really helped me to do that. And what I loved about the Young Readers edition is the chance to include so many more pictures. And in a way, I think because it's a really sort of multimedia book in a way, it's not just photographs, there are documents and newspaper clippings dotted throughout the book. And it was wonderful for me to go through and do that. It was almost like reliving that wonderful research trip that I talked about. And I think the readers can kind of see that as well, to see all the documents and the sources, the first-hand things that I was able to see and feel and get excited by, they're in the book. So you've got Leonard Grossman's business card, the lawyer who helps the Illinois women, his business card is in there. You've got the contract that Grace Fryer signed when she signed with her lawyer. You can see her signature on the contract, and so I loved being able to share those details with readers. And I have to say, part of me, and I don't know if any readers have done this yet, I think a couple have. I had one email actually from a reader today saying she'd done this. I've had from readers who fall in love with the women. They talk to me about how passionate they feel, they pray for them, they remember them. The book and their story has really moved them. They take these women to their hearts. And I kind of hope that for those readers who are so passionate about the story, they may actually be interested in the Young Readers edition because it has all these additional resources, these extra family pictures that have never been published before, things like Grace's signature on the contract she signed with her lawyer. I think, you know, as a book, not just for young readers to get into the story, but actually for people passionate about the Radium Girls, this is a really special sort of tribute to them because it's got all those extra details and resources in it as well.
Yeah, I do love those extra details. I think that they really elevate the story. But I think the other thing that's great about them is we live in a time where there's just a lot of questioning about resources and the verifiability of information. So, you know, having those firsthand documents in there is really nice. It helps give that, you know, to the story. You kind of touched a little bit on my next question, but I was curious to know, like, if you've heard from any young readers and what kind of feedback they've given you and what kind of responses or questions that they have.
Yeah, I do hear from young readers regularly, actually. I have to say, I'm not sure, I don't think I've yet heard from someone that's read the Young Readers edition that has then reached out to me, because a lot of high school students have actually read the older version, but lots of students have picked the Radium Girls as their History Day topic. And so I've heard from a lot of readers who, you know, are passionate about the story, are interested to know more, find the women inspirational. So all of that has been fantastic because, you know, I say in my author's note at the start of the Young Readers edition, I hope people will be inspired by these women, by the way they fight for justice, stand up for their rights, stand up for what they believe in. So I hope that the young readers coming to the story through this new edition will be similarly moved and inspired by the Radium Girls.
It is a really, truly inspiring story and just so important. I really appreciate you writing it. So what is the question that you wish people asked you when you did reviews and events?
I actually find that quite a hard question to answer. What question do I wish people asked me? I think for me, my overriding passion, as I said at the top of this talk, is just for the women to be remembered. So if I get a chance to talk about Grace Fryer, Catherine Donoghue, Catherine Sharp, Charlotte Purcell, that is my, you know, desire, to tell you that Grace was a brilliant, smart young woman, to tell you that Catherine Donoghue was incredibly devout, loved her children, gave evidence on her deathbed because this was an issue that she believed in so strongly, and she wanted to make things better, not only for her family, not only for her friends, but for everyone. These are the kind of people that the Radium Girls were, and any opportunity I have to champion them is important to me. So any question that allows me to do that is the question that I want to be asked.
This isn't on our sheet, so I'm going to spring a question on you. Sorry.
That's fine.
But I think that I might have an idea of the answer because of how you've talked, you know, but is there any one of the girl stories that particularly stood out to you or touched you in any way?
People often ask this, and I do find it difficult to answer because, you know, having written the book and followed each of their journeys through the archives and the research, so that, you know, obviously in writing a book like this, there's so much that doesn't go into the book that you still have to know. So I've walked that path with every single girl, and so each of them, as I was writing, was important to me, and I felt for them and with them at various different stages of their own story. But if I'm forced to answer, I would say Grace Fryer was always touched my heart, because I think she was really the one who kept up the fight for justice. And if it hadn't been for her and her tenacity, it could have been a very different outcome and a very different story. And the other one is, of course, as I've mentioned her a lot, Catherine Donahue in Illinois. She was my way into this story as well. She's the protagonist of the play that I directed. It was her monologue that I read. You know, that's how the play opens. So my first introduction to this story was an invented monologue by Melanie Marnich, but it's Catherine Donahue speaking. And I read just that monologue and turned to my husband and said, this is the play I want to direct next, before I'd even read the rest of it. So Catherine's story really did resonate, and she was with me all the way through. And I was just looking through the Young Readers edition before we went live, and just seeing the photographs of her again, the photos of her with her family, the photos of her with her doctor, seeing how thin she was at the end, seeing that strength and dignity that she had despite everything that she suffered. She really was just such an extraordinary woman. So her story always touches me, and I get choked up talking about it even now, because I just think she was such a special woman.
I was getting a little choked up too, and
Yeah.
it meant a lot to you, so that's really awesome. We are going to have some questions from some other libraries that have already been submitted, and then we are taking questions from participants. If you want to submit your questions through the Google Doc link that's been submitted or shared with you in the chat. But before we get to that, I'm just curious if you can tell us anything that you're working on right now. What do we have to look forward to coming from you?
I do have something that new that's coming. I'm not announced it, so I'm still sort of hedging my bets and being a bit mysterious about it. But I can say it is another American history book. I can say it's another story of female empowerment. It's set in the Civil War era in America, so 1860s, which has obviously been very different, lots of different research, a very different period to write about, which has been great. And it's also got elements in the same way that Radium Girls did. It's got elements of courtroom drama, it's got elements of science, and as I say, feminism and justice and fascinating facts and all that sort of thing. And at its heart, a strong woman who I think has been forgotten and deserves to be remembered. So that's what the new book is about. And I should add, by the way, it's due out June next year, June 2021. So there will be more. I think Sourcebooks are going to have galleys maybe at the end of the year, I think. We're just working on them at the moment. So watch this space. Yeah, I hope librarians will support it and people will be interested in it when the book is published.
I'm sure that we will, because you obviously are a fantastic researcher and writer. So
thank you.
Yeah. We have a question from a reader in West Nyack Library in New York who asked, what surprised you the most when you were doing research for the Radium Girls?
What surprised me the most? The thing that surprised me, I think, the most when I first started researching is the fact that some of the girls lived. I think, the play gives the impression, and I think when you think about them swallowing radioactive paint, you think, well, surely they all died young. And it was, it was completely fatal for all of them. And actually, the fact is, some of them were able to get medical treatment. For example, Charlotte Purcell, she had a tumor in her arm, but if she had her arm amputated, as she did, she actually was then able to live on. She suffered a great deal. She had to wear a back brace, and she had osteoporosis and various other problems. She lost her teeth and so on, but she did survive into her 80s. So that, to me, I think, was probably the most surprising thing, that actually not all of the women died. And that is not to negate their suffering, because, as I say, some women, I know there was one woman who was bedridden for 50 years. So she was sort of struck down early, but then didn't actually pass away. So she actually suffered probably more in a way, because she had to live for 50 years with this radium, drilling holes in her bones and that suffering. But as I say, I think the fact that they didn't all die early was what really surprised me.
Yeah, that was surprising to me also. And
Mm.
it was also surprising to me, like at the beginning where they're talking about how, like all the products that they used and sold with the radium in it.
Mm. True. Yeah. Yeah.
Like a health
That's really
elixir.
Yeah, and that's it, 5 to 7 glasses a day of this radioactive elixir. It's not just like they're saying, oh, just one shot. 5 to 7 glasses a day of radioactive water. It's just like, yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah, it really was. So somebody from the DeForest Area Public Library in Wisconsin wants to know, what were the easiest and the hardest parts about writing this book?
Ooh. The easiest bits were, I think the sort of dramatic shape of the story came quite easily to me. I think, as again, having done the play first, I had this connection to the story and a sort of vision for the dramatic arc of it. That was it. I found it quite easy then to shape the history and the facts into that dramatic arc, because I knew very clearly what it was I wanted to do with the book. And so I guess that was another thing about what came easy. I knew how I wanted to tell this story as well. So that was another easy bit. I knew I wanted it to be narrative. I knew I wanted it to open with Catherine Sharp on her first day at work. So a lot of those sort of the sort of vision bits came quite easy. I could see it all in my head and had it very clear. The shape of the story was very clear to me. The hardest part of writing, I would probably say the fact that I had so much material and had to cut it. Even I had to cut 60,000 words from the first draft because it was just way too long. And I think even getting to that really long first draft was hard because of the amount of material that I had. And a bit like I was saying when we talked about the adaptation process for the Young Readers edition, knowing that for the greater good, it had to be shorter. It was a similar thing in terms of choosing what not to include. It's like, this is all amazing material, but actually, is it relevant now? And the postscript is a clear example of that, actually, because when I delivered the book, and even when it was edited, the postscript was much, much longer. It was probably about 10,000 words long and really went into much more detail about what was happening in the 1960s and 1970s in those radium plants that came later. And my editor raised it a couple of times with me. She's like, I think, it feels like the story's finished, and then we have this whole thing. I don't think, I don't think it's working. And I was kind of wedded to it for quite a long time. And then it literally was, I was doing my final review before it was going to be typeset, which is like cut-off points. Once it's typeset, there's no time for changes. And I read that final read through and I was like, she's right. It needs to be cut. And so even at that late stage, I suddenly boiled it down to that, couple of pages that you see in the final thing. And it is much more powerful to be shorter. So cutting things down was definitely the hardest part.
So from about the time that you got the idea, like, okay, so I found this play and I want to write it into this book, you go to America, you research it, you're writing it, you have to find a publisher who's going to publish it for you. Like, how long was that process for you?
I actually did things the other way around. So as you said at the top of this talk, my background is actually in publishing myself. So I worked in publishing for over a decade before I went freelance. And as I said also at the top about this serendipity of this story, finding the Radium Girls story at a time when I had gone freelance, so that when I wanted to do the book, it wasn't like I had a desk job where I was like, well, I'd love to write this book and I'd love to go to America and research it, but I can't because, I'm an editorial director. I was freelance, so I could say, right, this is what I want to do. This is a project I want to do. And actually, I pitched my book and got a book deal before I went on that research trip. So I couldn't have committed the time and the money to it if I didn't already have that commitment from a publisher. So my process, at that time, I didn't have an agent. So I was doing everything myself through the contacts that I'd gained in my career. So I was directing the play, knew while I was rehearsing that writing the book was something I wanted to do. So I wrote a book proposal just based on what I knew of the story from the other books I'd read and so on. pitched that to editors, was able to invite, and that's British editors, this was all in the UK, was able to invite the British editors to come to see the play, which I think then helped them to grasp what the story was. And in fact, the editor who bought it did come to see the play. So she, timing wise, I was directing the play sort of December, January, February, March time. We put it on in March 2015. I think I sent my proposal out end of February 2015. I got the offer to write it in May. So it took a little while of going back and forward. And actually, again, it was that editor who said originally my book proposal finished with the court case victory. And I think I'd mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned to her off the cuff or something about this extraordinary legacy of the Manhattan Project and, you know, all the nuclear arms race. And Abigail, my editor, said, we'd really like you to expand that. Can you write me that? And then perhaps we can make an offer if it's got that in it as well. So that was why the offer was so delayed. So I got the offer in May and then came to America in October. And I delivered the book at the end of January the following year, as in it was October 2015, I came to America, end of January 2016, I delivered the book. So it was super quick. As I say, this is the foolish thing of being naive about how long it would take me. I then had to work flat out 7 days a week, 18 hours a day in order to meet the deadline, but I got there. So.
The county of San Luis Obispo in California, you kind of actually almost answered this question just then, but they were asking about the process of getting published, and they were asking specifically about the difference in the UK and the US.
Yeah, so well, the US deal came about after the UK deal. So I sold world rights to Simon & Schuster UK. That was partly because, as I say, I didn't have an agent. I was a one-man band. I wanted a publisher. You know, I can't sell foreign rights from my flat in London, whereas a big global publisher like S&S can sell it. And so at the London Book Fair, I think it was actually, they met my editor at Sourcebooks. And so that's how the American deal came from there. So American publishers bid on it via my UK publisher, and the rights were sold that way. So does that answer the question? Is there more detail? Is that it?
No, I think that's good. I think that answers.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So we do have a couple of questions from participants who are watching this at home.
Sure.
And Donna wants to know if you could write about any other historical event, either in American or British history, what would it be?
Ooh. Well, that's $1 million question. I don't know. I think what's certainly what I like to do when I'm writing history in a way is to try and do something. I think what's hard is often with sort of key historical events, they've been written to death. So it's trying to either find a brand new angle on it, or it's about discovering a little known piece of history, which isn't then the thing that you would know. So I find that question quite hard to answer, actually, and yeah, I'm not sure I can answer that, because I think if I was going to write on something, I'm quite, as you could tell earlier, I'm quite a secretive person about projects that I'm sort of thinking about and working on, because I like to be ready before I sort of talk about them. So yeah, I can't really answer that, because I think if I was going to choose something, I would probably be squirreling away and working on it. And if it's something that's obvious that I would say straight away, I probably wouldn't write on it, because it would be too obvious, if that makes sense. So.
Margaret K wants to know, why do you think some authors choose to tell history through fiction? And I'm assuming they're talking about historical fiction instead of nonfiction.
Some people, I think, I'm a nonfiction person because I like to know it's rooted in fact. I love basing it on the sources. As I say, I felt very strongly with the Radium Girls, I wanted to do justice to the real people, because several people asked me, why don't you just do it as a novel? Why don't you just do it as fiction? Then you don't have to do as much research, perhaps. You don't have to worry about if there's holes in the research where you're like, well, I just don't know what happened. You can fill in those details. Whereas I felt very much that I wanted this to be an authentic, accurate portrayal of their story. Yes, I wanted it to read like a novel, but I wanted to be true to them and not sensationalize it, not sort of use their suffering for entertainment in a way. It felt awkward to me to even consider the idea. I was like, no, these are real people. The story is strong enough. You don't need to fictionalize it. It's incredible and amazing as it is. So I felt very strongly with the Radium Girls that it had to be non-fiction for me, and I couldn't countenance the idea of fictionalizing it. That seemed to almost rip off their suffering, if you will, to fictionalize it. But I know some other authors, as I say, they want to get into the thoughts and minds of their characters. And I was lucky that I had this tranche of first person accounts, so I could say, Catherine loved The Winter Snows of My Hometown because Catherine wrote that in one of her pieces. And I think some authors want to give you that insight, but the documents and sources aren't there, and so they make it up. That's perhaps they feel to discuss that topic. They know the best way to engage a reader is to have that personal, emotive side of things. And if the data isn't there, then, this way you can still communicate about that history, but you can do so in a way that is engaging without having to be true to the sources. Yeah.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much. Brianna L. wants to know, is there any interest in making the book into a movie, such as like with Hidden Figures?
There has been interest in a film, which is great. Some of you may have seen that there is a Radium Girls movie coming out soon, but almost like what I just said, it's fictionalized. So it's not about Grace Fryer and Catherine Donahue. It's I haven't seen it, so I don't know, but I can see on the cast list, they've made up the women, and I watched the trailer, and I think it's inspired by the setting and the story, but it's not about the real women. There has been interest in my book and in the real history and the real women. So I'm hopeful that may see the light of day one day. I think Hollywood moves very slowly. But what's fantastic is, there is interest in telling the story authentically. So I hope that movie might happen one day.
I hope so too. That would be awesome. I think that we answered Chrissy G's question about the timeline of the book. You gave us a really great timeline, so that's great. Mickey, I wonder if is perhaps a librarian like me. She says, when you were in the sites and handling the primary source documents, did you have to take any special protection given the extended life of radium contamination?
Yeah, that's something I didn't think about at the time, I have to say. Often when I do events, I talk about this really special thing, a moment that happened for me that was perhaps one of the highlights of my research trip. Going to this tiny museum in Utica, I asked to see their Radium Girls material. They just showed me like this one single picture in a display cabinet, and I was like, do you have anything else? And they were like, well, maybe there's something in the back, feel free to have a look. It wasn't on display. And going through that, I found handwritten letters from Catherine Donahue to Pearl Payne. Such a spine-tingling moment. And because I was literally just in a back room, these documents were just, on the shelf in a dusty folder. I was able to get them out of the folder, and I could hold the paper with my bare hands. There weren't even any white gloves. It was, I was just there touching the paper that Catherine had touched. It's so special. And only later, when I talked about this at an event, someone said to me, well, was the paper radioactive? Because Catherine herself was radioactive. So how safe is it? And obviously the answer is I don't know, and hopefully I'm going to be okay. With the other archives, I would say, I mean, who knows? The short answer is there were no special protections. I went to the National Archives in Chicago and went through some of the boxes. There were thousands and thousands of boxes of the scientific studies of the women that lasted for decades. So I just touched the surface with those. And because it was the National Archives, that was more, wear white gloves and handle things carefully, but it was no more added protection than any other archival source would expect. It wasn't like, for example, Madame Curie's papers, which are still in a lead-lined vault. And I think when researchers go to Madame Curie's papers to have a look there, they use photocopies because the original documents are too dangerous for researchers to use.
It's really terrifying when you think about that.
Yeah, I have to say, at one point as well, when I was staying in Ottawa, I was really thirsty in the middle of the night, and I got up and I drank a glass of tap water. And only after I did it, I thought, I'm in the middle of this is a radioactive hotspot cleaned up by the EPA. Perhaps I shouldn't be drinking the tap water.
Right. Wow. So Jay asks, in the postscript, is it true that the luminous processes was still operating in 1978?
Yeah, absolutely true. Yeah. Yeah, it's mind-boggling, but yes, it was right up until that February day when it was closed down by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And it's one of those things. They operated with impunity for decades handling radium, and it was only because they switched to putting some tritium in their makeup that the NRC got involved. And then it was only through that they realized, actually, this factory is, completely contaminating the neighborhood. And it was, had they not used tritium, who knows, they could still be going, because it was that lax. Safety standards, safety concerns had been raised for decades, but nothing ever happened to shut it down. And it was only when they switched to tritium and the NRC got involved that actually that was when the sort of the shutdown notice was issued. Yeah.
So we have about 15 minutes left. Cassie wants to know the story. There's a little statement before the question. The story is a juxtaposition of the evil of the powerful against the triumph of the human spirit. This is a great little statement.
That's lovely. That's a great quote.
Does this impact your opinion of the characters of the character of America or of the women themselves? Did it change how you thought about us here in America?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm always open-hearted to Americans. So, I think America is known for being, having sort of inner strength and determination. I think that's a characteristic that, as an outsider looking at America, I would say that certainly that's characteristic of the Americans I have met. That sort of determination that you can do anything, so I think, no, I don't think it changed my mind in terms of that. I mean, the women as characters, yes, absolutely. I just think they're so inspiring. And I know in my own life, whenever I faced challenges, if I think about them, both what they achieved and also what they went through, it really helped me to get through things, because I'm either like, I need to be like them, or, pull yourself together. This is not what they went through. So I find them completely inspirational. So I hope other readers will too.
All right, I have this one final question from an audience member, and it's Ashley. And Ashley says she's interested in your research process again. And she says, I'm sure taking notes during your research is a daunting task. Can you tell us about your note taking and the organizing process? So go about doing that specifically, okay. I think.
Yeah. I do absolutely. You asked about what questions do I like. I love this question, actually, because I love talking about how I organize things. So I think my process is probably, perhaps unusual because I'm a Brit researching in America. So of course I only have a finite amount of time in the country, and I can't easily go back. I'm not going to hop on a plane just because I've forgotten one source, whereas if you live down the road from the library that you're going to, then it's much easier, or even on the same continent, it's much easier. So my process is, when I'm in America, I'm trying to gather as much material as possible, and I don't really assess it until I get back home. And to gather that material, I take photographs. So I'm taking photographs of the documents just for my own private use, which is allowed. And then I take them all back to the UK. And then I do the librarians will love this. I index them all with a unique reference number. So for example, if it's a document from the Library of Congress, it might be LC001. And if LC001 has 5 pages, then I'm notating it LC001:4 for page 4, whatever. I go through all those photographs now and I plot them into a chronological timeline, which is just a Word document. It's got 3 columns, a date, what happened, and that reference number. So everything goes into the chronological timeline. And you can imagine if, for example, it's a court transcript, that court transcript will be Catherine Sharp on the stand. In her court testimony, she will talk about that February day she first went to work. She'll talk about when she started to get sick. She'll talk about her cousin Irene dying, all in that one source. But in terms of my timeline, obviously that's things from 1917, from 1922, from 1923. So you plot each gem, whether it's a quotation, whether it's a fact, something that happened, whether it's a detail like one newspaper clipping described Catherine's father living in a dingy 3rd floor flat. So to know that's the kind of background she came from, that's, you know, to understand the character in that way, everything goes into the timeline. Only after I've gone through every single photograph and plotted it all do I plan my book. I am very, I'm a stickler for detail. Everything is planned to the nth degree, like almost like the end of the, you know, I almost know the sentence that I'm going to use to end chapters sometimes. If there's a really like, this is a great quote, for example, the quote that ends part 1, you know, the diagnosis that Catherine Sharp gave me hope. That's such a great quote to end a part on. So I knew that from the beginning, that's where I was going to end it. And only once I've plotted all of that do I start writing. So that's a very long answer because you can tell I'm enthusiastic about it. But I love my system because the system then means you can find that quote about gave me hope in seconds because everything is plotted. So yeah, it's a good system. I find it works for me.
I think that's great. And I think it does answer some of the questions, actually, different ones that we had from participants here. We actually did get a couple more questions.
Yeah, sure. I'm here.
So, yeah. Maggie wants to know, are you currently doing any research during the pandemic? Are libraries around you open? How are you traveling? How are you doing research now?
Yeah, well, I'm lucky. I'm very lucky. So as I said, my new book, we're hoping to have the arcs at the end of this year. So I delivered the manuscript literally just before lockdown happened. I think it was 4th of March was my deadline. So I'm not researching at the moment. I had luckily completed all my research before lockdown happened. Obviously, at the moment, Brits are not allowed into America. So I would struggle to research at the moment. That said, an awful lot is online these days. You know, I did for the second book that's coming out next year. I did another big research trip, gathered lots of material, but there are always things that you can't find, that you miss. And librarians are so helpful if you email and you say, I see you've got this in your thing. I'm from Britain. I can't get there. Can you send me a scan? They do it. They're wonderful. You know, and often they would do that even if you were in America, and you know, a lot of it is digitized these days and you can get hold of it that way. So luckily for me, I'm not researching at the moment. It would be very challenging trying to do it, and as you say, a lot of the libraries are shut, or they're, you know, and if you don't have staff actually in the building, you can't access those files, of course. So if the lockdown is a hard lockdown and you haven't even got staff in the library, it would be impossible to get the files. So
yeah, it's definitely a weird time.
Very much so.
Yeah, for sure. Judy wants to know what you're reading lately and what are some favorites that you would like to recommend to people watching.
Oh, I haven't been reading lately. I am busy personally, but also when I'm writing a new book and editing a new book, rightly or wrongly, I tend not to read while I'm in that process. I just want the one story in my head to try and keep it straight. But stuff to recommend. I loved Karen Abbott's The Ghosts of Eden Park. That's definitely the best nonfiction I've read recently. Blast from the Past, one of my favorite books, is The Time Traveler's Wife, Audrey Niffenegger. Absolutely love that. I'm just looking at my bookshelf to see what else I would recommend. I mean, I'm a huge fan of people like Jeffrey Deaver, Peter James, who's a British crime writer, you know, just for things like that. And also, I really enjoy the J.K. Rowling, the Robert Galbraith crime books. So if people haven't given that a try yet, I'd recommend those because I really enjoy them. They've been the books that I've enjoyed most on my summer holidays recently. And one more, Kathleen Moran, who is a fantastic British writer. I think she's also successful in America too. But I really love her work. She's a very feisty feminist. She writes nonfiction and fiction, and she's brilliant, really, really brilliant writer.
Those are lots of great recommendations that you're sharing with us. It is interesting to know that you kind of like to keep everything out of your head while you're, you know, in the process of writing, which I think makes sense. And I've heard like other, you know, authors talk about kind of the same thing, you know, because you don't want to get other stuff in there and mix it up or, you know, that type of stuff. This has been fantastic. I thank you so much for talking with me about this. It's a great story. I wasn't familiar with it until, you know, you wrote these books and I read them. And as a woman and a mother to two girls, one of, you know, a teenager and almost a teenager, and getting to talk to them about this, it's fantastic to talk to them about, you know, the resilience and how they were able to change the world, you know, not just their lives, but influence, you know, the laws and stuff moving forward and workers' rights and those type of things. So it's fantastic. I thank you very much. And I thank you.
Thank you.
There's my girls right there. And I thank you for taking the time to talk with me. I want to thank participants as well. Sourcebooks is going to be listing the winners in the chat. And if you are a winner, you can email Lizzie Lewandowski to claim your prize. And her email is going to be in the chat box. So all of that should be right there in the chat box for you. Congratulations to you guys for winning those prizes. And I just want to, again, Kate, just thank you so much for your time. And I want to thank everybody who participated and for your great questions. And thank you for just spending this hour with us. You can join us next month, which is on Tuesday, December 1st at 7 p.m. Eastern, which is 6 Central, if you're in Texas with me, to hear Alicia Jasinski talk about her debut fantasy, The Dark Tide. Sourcebooks has added a link to the chat, or they will any minute now, so that you can sign up right now if you'd like, and they'll give you an email reminder. And they'll be sending you email follow-ups as a reminder. And I hope you all have a great rest of your night. Thank you guys all so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you so much, Kate. This was awesome.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Nice to see you. Stay safe.
That's right. Stay very safe.